Tonight's presentation is going to be on DBeaver, which is a free cross-platform database tool. Kevin Bell presented this at Armin's Access Day earlier. I think you said it was in March. And I was really impressed by the tool and asked Kevin to kind of do a follow-up for our group, because I think it will be really something that a lot of people will find a home for in their toolkit. Before I jump into that, quickly remind you, we're still waiting for the Monaco SQL editor. The roadmap says it's due out in September, and I don't know exactly what that means, but we should start seeing previews of that pretty soon in one place or another. And of course, the modern chart improvements. I've seen some pre-release demos of the modern charts, and I think that's going to be great. The Discord server is still up there for those of you who want to hang out. It is open all the time. There are a couple of scheduled events during the week where you can just drop in and count on somebody else being there. And I wanted to mention Kent is launching his chapter of Access User Groups, I believe in September.
That's what I'm aiming for, but
Okay,
it's only 6 weeks away. So,
okay, great.
So what I'm trying to do is set it up pretty much exactly the same time as this one, but offset by 2 weeks.
Okay, so we're looking forward to that, joining that. And there is at least one other chapter, the Italy chapter. I think they're shooting for either September or October. The Latin America chapter seems to have not been as active as we had hoped, but they're still out there. So I know Juan is always looking for ways to increase the reach of the groups. And as I mentioned last month, my firm commitment is to be doing this 4 more months at the most, after which someone a lot younger, a lot prettier, and a lot more ambitious will take over this job. So if you know anybody who's interested in participating as the coordinator for a chapter of Access User Groups, let me know, or ask them to contact me. I would love to talk to somebody about doing that. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'll turn the time over to Kevin to share your screen, and we'll take it from there. Thanks, Kevin, and thank you all for joining tonight.
Okay. Hopefully you guys are seeing my screen. I'm assuming sees it. So as George mentioned, this is kind of an encore presentation for what I gave to the Access Day presentation in March, which is a one-day conference that piggybacks on the MVP summit that Armin Stein has put together. Obviously took several years off with COVID when the MVP summit either didn't happen or was all virtual, but this year we redid it. And George kind of, bait and switched me. He said my presentation was good and he was impressed by, not that he was impressed with DBeaver, but hopefully you'll like both of them. When I did this for Armin's talk, I actually was kind of cagey. I didn't actually say it was with DBeaver because I didn't want people going out and downloading it and kind of stealing the thunder. So I originally had a working title for this that was, if I can click on this, it was Leave It to Beaver, or more importantly, Leave It to DBeaver. So what is DBeaver? Well, it's, as George said, it's a free open source universal database management tool that supports a wide variety of databases. If you have ever used Management Studio with SQL Server, it's kind of like that in that it gives you a lot of design things, but this is kind of database agnostic, so it'll work with multiple databases. With that, there's some kind of compromises. It's going to provide a kind of consistent interface, but there's going to be some goofy things, and I'll show you how this looks on Access and SQL Server. in a little bit. Now, what we're really going to focus on is the kind of the database design or ERD diagrams, but DBeaver has a ton of features. It is cross-platform, so you can run this on Windows, Mac, or Linux. As I had mentioned, it's multi-database support, so MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server, Oracle, SQLite, Access. There are a ton of databases you can use this with. And it also gives you kind of the database navigation where you can kind of look at the data, query the data, you can browse objects, you can do CRUD operations. It also has querying and scripting, so you can basically use whatever the native language is, and it does syntax checking. It's not probably going to be as whiz-bang as the Redgate tools, but it's also free. It has some ability to do data transfer, so import and export. I haven't used that feature, but it's there. It also manages connections. I don't know about you, but I always check the little box in Management Studio that says save your password. And invariably, I go switch to a different client's machine or something or other, and that password is lost. This will actually cache your password if you need it, and it'll keep it cached locally. So it's kind of nice not to have to go look up passwords on common databases you connect to. It also has a pretty robust plugin and library extension model, so you can get third-party tools, such as maybe a SQL formatter if you've got your own format you want to bring. And then the piece we're really going to talk about is the data visualization, and we'll spend pretty much all the time on that. If there's some time, I'll show you some of the other kind of low-hanging fruits that I have kind of discovered. So that's what DBeaver is. So I guess who am I? Well, I've been, I say, developing with Access since version 1. I had no idea what I was doing. This was kind of before the internet was really a thing. So you were looking at manuals or you got a couple of good books. I made a lot of mistakes, but I stuck with it. And by the beta version of Access 2.0, we were using it on SQL Server, which I think was the first release after Microsoft and Sybase kind of went their ways. It was like SQL 4.2.1 or something like that. So it goes way back. Ended up running a small consulting firm in Colorado for 15 plus years. We would specialize in building data-driven applications for either companies that didn't have an IT staff or departments and corporations that did, but their IT staff couldn't get to them for years. So we would come in sometimes behind the scenes and build something custom for them. In 2008, I guess I had my first midlife crisis, and instead of getting the sports car and younger girlfriend, I got a job on the Microsoft Access team as a test engineer. And since I don't think anybody from Microsoft's here, I can kind of poke fun that that's actually back when Microsoft paid people to test their software rather than letting you guys do it for free. I'm currently working as a consulting manager, which I have nobody that reports to me, so that's a pretty good deal. With a company called Moss Adams, which is a large accounting firm. I don't do anything with accounting. We actually build equity management software for large corporations, including, like, I think we've put systems in 3 of the Magnificent 7. And then just kind of a personal note, I enjoy playing baseball, cycling, and traveling. Unfortunately, I'm shut down with some knee surgeries this year, so I'm just kind of sitting around putting on weight, which is not real fun, but hopefully the surgery will help me get back to doing this later. So with that, I'm going to assume you guys can all figure out how to install DBeaver. I just wanted to call out a couple things. And I guess this is a good question. Has anybody here heard of DBeaver before this presentation? Is anybody using it?
No.
Okay.
I installed it after your presentation before and played around with it a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll assume you guys have never really used it, and hopefully that'll change after this. The thing I wanted to call out with installing is there's actually 2 different versions. There's the community version, which we're going to look at. And then there's the pro version, which is a paid subscription that gives you some more kind of tools, like you can build visual diagrams like the query grid where you can visually drag relationships. It also lets you share, which the current version of DBeaver doesn't really do. It's the community version. And you can also install this from the Microsoft Store. My corporate account is blocked from the store, but I think this is probably a better way to install it because I think you get updates a little more seamlessly than getting prompted all the time and having a version bump. So, this worked better when you're in a large room with a bunch of people, but we'll try it here. So what's Microsoft's most popular database? Is it FoxPro? Is it Access, SQL Server? Maybe something a little more modern like Azure Cosmos DB, or maybe this is a trick question and it's actually Excel. Any thoughts out there? What maybe the most popular database at Microsoft or Microsoft databases?
Define database.
Excel is not a database.
True, but this may be a trick question. Any thoughts?
I don't want to fall into.
And popular is pretty generic. So
a text file.
Yeah. Turns out this is a double secret probation trick question. The inherited database. So I don't care what you're going to get. You're probably going to see more databases that somebody else created than you probably created if you do this long enough. A lot of those databases are, coming from Access people that aren't really Access people, that were maybe Excel workbooks that are loaded in, and they're probably kind of garbage. So this entity relationship can help you kind of decipher what's going on. And in fact, I'll tell you the story in just a second. But so I put this in there just because I'm eventually presenting this to our group, and some of them may not know what an entity relationship diagram is, but I'm sure you all do. It's basically a visual representation of the entities, i.e. tables, in your database. I think it's very valuable when you're designing a database, so you can sit with stakeholders or people that are maybe not technical and give them a representation of, well, here's how things are going to relate. I think it's also more valuable when you're investing in that inherited database. And what triggered the thought for this topic is I was working with one of our more junior people, and she was tasked with basically documenting the as-is state of an internal database that somebody wrote that we were going to kind of take over and clean up and build a new front end for. It was actually an Access front end. And she was having trouble getting the SQL diagrams to generate. And I said, well, I created an ERD yesterday using DBeaver. And she was like shell-shocked. She had never knew that this was a thing. So I figured if she didn't know, there's probably a lot of people that don't know. So that's really what we're going to focus on, is the ERD diagramming stuff in DBeaver. Now, you've all used Access for probably multiple decades. Access really doesn't have an ERD. It's got the relationship, which is kind of a pseudo ERD, but it really is a design surface, and it's pretty limited. You only have one diagram, which I think most people find kind of frustrating, especially when you compare to SQL Server. It's got some goofy things where if you have a table that has multiple relationships, i.e. it's joining to a table twice, it'll show table 1 or _1, I think is the kind of acronym it uses. So it puts the table in there twice, which really kind of clutters up your diagram. And there's no real way to zoom around. You kind of get what you get, and that's it. And there's really no customization at all that you can do with this. Now, the relationship diagrams in SQL Server through Management Studio are definitely better. I still think it's primarily a design surface. It does have the advantage you can do multiple diagrams, and it does have the ability to zoom, not as much as DBeaver, but you can kind of do something with it. There's really not much customization you can do. And I think my bigger pet peeve is I find it very slow, especially when you're dealing with an Azure database. And again, the number of tables matters greatly because it has to kind of like regenerate itself every time. So with that, we're going to jump into a demo in just a second, but I wanted to call out, while I'm still in the slide deck, kind of the hierarchy of how DBeaver works. At the very top level is a workspace, and you can have multiple workspaces, but you can only have one workspace open at a time. So that kind of defines the entity of what you have. Inside that, you can have multiple projects. So you could group those by, connection type, whether it's maybe production, development, Q&A, whatever it is, or you could group it by clients. I typically have a folder per client. And then inside that, you can set folders up. So if you break it down by client, you can have a test database and a production database, or however you want to break it up. But that's the hierarchy, and we'll see that in just a second. It'll make more sense. So with that, I'm going to flip over and let's start with Access. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the new Northwind database. And, oh, that's interesting. It didn't open up the design menu, or it opens it and closes it. Okay, let me.
Don't you just love it when a developer says, that's interesting?
Yeah, it wasn't doing it when I started from the double clicking on it. It works fine, but I guess when you close it and reopen it, it somehow hides all the ribbons, which is probably a bug. Anyways, inside Access, if you go to the database tools, you'll see the relationship. And this is kind of a plain Jane, boom, this is what you get. Like, it lays it out. All the windows are the same size. It makes very little attempt to lay it out. All the lines are going everywhere. You can see I've got an employees table here, and then I got an employees _ table 1. That's it. I mean, there's no good way to really print this. It is what it is. To my knowledge, this hasn't changed in 30 years. If it has, it's been very minor things. So this is kind of the, it is what it is, right? That's all you get. So with that, I'll close Access. And then just as a way of refresher, let me toggle over to SQL Server. And for this database, I've actually installed the worldwide importers, and we'll see why I picked that one in a little bit. But it's a little better here. I can click on a new database, and I'm going to go ahead and select all the tables, and I'm going to hit Add. And it's going to drop them down one by one, which is painfully slow because there's, I don't know, 30 or 40 tables in here. And it kind of makes one pass. You can see the screen paint didn't really refresh. And then you're going to see a second pass run through here after it gets all the tables down. That goes much quicker. That's the second pass. And I believe what it's doing there is it's dropping down the relationships. And if I close it, it then reorders it. And it reorders it pretty quickly. But all up, that takes kind of 40 seconds. And it, it laid it out. It actually sized. You can see all the fields. So it does a better job than Access. I do have the ability that I can zoom, so I can kind of see what's out there. I can't really drag, but I can slide over, and you can see the people table in here has a relation to basically every other table. So this is a really kind of dirty diagram. I can zoom to fit, which I can drop out here, but it doesn't really give me anything. I mean, it's I can barely read the tables with this. And there is one feature that I have to show, because I don't know how long it's been there, but I only discovered it a few years ago. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little kind of crosshair. And if you hover over, you get another crosshair. And if you somehow figure out to click and hold, up pops a little diagram that you can pan around. How long that's been there, I have no idea. It's obviously not real discoverable, but you can at least kind of pan around, but you can't change the size of that at all. So, so those are kind of what you traditionally would use for an ERD diagram. I'm going to go ahead and close this down. And then let's flip over to DBeaver now. So this is DBeaver, and this is a workspace, and you can see I have a bunch of, these are projects. So the workspace is everything. These are the projects. I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a new project. I can click on that and I'll call this Access Specific. There are some things you can change. I've never looked at them, but you can change, I think, some of the default behaviors. I'll go ahead and create that. It has now created a new project, and I have connections, which there's nothing in the connections right now. So that's the first thing we have to do is add a connection. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new connection. And here are all the different databases you can connect to. I've probably only heard of maybe a third of these. Access shows up in the popular list only because I've used it. So you'll have to hunt for it in the all list, but you can type and it'll give you there. And if I click on this and hit next, I then just have to simply browse for that database, and we'll connect to that same Northwind database. There's no password, so I can go from there. I'm going to go ahead and hit the test connection. It popped up and it told me what driver it's using. It's using a third-party JDBC driver. The DBeaver is written in Java. The first time you click on this, it's going to pop up and say, hey, you need a driver. So don't be alarmed. It's kind of usually a one-time deal where you'll download the driver. Once you have the driver and you get this dialog, you know you're connected. So I'm going to go ahead and hit finish. And that's it. We now have a database here. So we can drill into this and you can see it lists tables, views, which is a little weird because Access doesn't have views, and then indexes, procedures, and data types. So we'll look at these. And if you look here, you can see this lists all the tables from the new Northwind database. And if I go to views, you might not be too surprised to see you see all the SQL queries in there. And then indexes, you can see all the indexes in here. Unless you wrote the database, these are probably meaningless to you. You could probably decipher what it is if you looked hard enough, but you can see the indexes. And then this one here, I was really kind of intrigued with when it popped up. It's the procedures. I had no idea what was going to be under here, thinking, is it looking at my functions? What is it doing? Well, if I drill into here, it's actually looking at all the kind of baked in functions. So if I go look at maybe cint, doesn't tell me there's no source available. I can see the parameters going in, so maybe this is useful. I'm not sure why they chose to show you this, but it's, obviously the SQL Server would show you stored procedures. And then along the same lines, you have the listed data types. But if you look at these are going to kind of translate to SQL Server data types, not Access data types. And I think there's some duplicates in here, like varchar and nvarchar. Basically the same thing. Access only has text and large text. But you can kind of see what's in there. So we'll look at the SQL Server in a second, but that's the beginning of like how you would drill in here. So now I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to create a diagram. So I'm going to create a new ER diagram. I'm going to call this Northwind demo. I can drill into here. I can select individual tables, or in this case, I'll just select them all. I'll go ahead and hit finish. And after just a couple seconds, you can see it generated an ERD diagram that I can now move around and play with. So there you go. So this built it on the fly. Now, what makes this kind of dynamic is I can go in here, and if I select, say, this relationship, and it may be hard to see on the screen, but it lights up the relationship line green, and then it highlights what fields are related. So I can quickly kind of look for a relationship or decide what a relationship is. With an Access, I'd have to go click on it and kind of guess where it was lined up, or double click, open up the relationship and see what the fields are. You can also click on, say, a key field, and it'll light up everywhere in the database that it's being used. And I find this super useful if I want to know where things are. So you can see the order has the customer and the shipper points back to companies. And then we have contacts, and then product vendors, and then the vendor for the purchase order. So I find that super useful for, just kind of figuring out where things are. Now, we looked at the zooming in SQL. Here's the zooming we have in DBeaver. I can go all the way down to 10% apparently twice, or I can go up to 400% if I really want to drill in there. So a lot more control over what you're doing. And then, of course, I can just, if I want to drill in a little bit, I can use the buttons here. This is the arrange diagram, which basically puts it back to the default. So be very careful with that one. If you spend any time kind of laying it out, it won't remember it. You can do grid. So if you want to, snap things to a grid to really get a nice, precise layout, you can do that. I don't use that very often. There is a pan mode. So I've just toggled now. I can just grab and scroll. So if I've got a big diagram, I can kind of float around to where I want to be. I'll turn that off. And then we'll look at properties later. And then this is probably one of my favorite features. If I click on the right place, let me move the window out of the way. So, SQL had that little bitty one in the corner. Well, this gives me a much bigger one. And as if I were to scale out, it grows. So if you've got a really big diagram, you can kind of easily find your way around. And then there are some, the ability to print a diagram, which I've never done, or I can go ahead and save it to a external format. And I think it's a PNG or JPEG maybe. Oh, there's a few more. Bitmap. And I won't bother to do that, but I will show you if I can toggle to the right screen. Here was one I created earlier. I think, I got to drag it over. Just open it in Paint. But here's one that I actually spent a little bit of time aligning things. And Armin Stein have had a good chat about like the perfect ERD like diagram. You wouldn't have any lines that cross. And that's really hard to do as you get into a complicated system, but certainly in a subsystem, it's achievable. So shout out to the people that did the Northwind. You can actually do this diagram and you don't get any kind of lines that overlap. So it seems like a pretty clean diagram. There are a couple goofy ones down here. There's a self-referencing between employee and supervisor. If I click on that, oops, what's going on here? Oh, I'm still in the toggle mode. Turn that off. If I click on this, I click on it, you can see it shows it with that self-referencing line, which kind of makes sense. Oops, it's a little bit too far back. A couple of the other things I really like is down here, you can search. So let's say I'm looking for something, I think maybe it's unit cost. I can type, if I type correctly, I can type unit down there and it'll highlight any of the fields or table names that match. So you can see I got unit cost and I can actually jump between things. So there's the unit price, there's a quantity, and then it basically jumps me down to all the fields that have a match. So that's good if you're, you think you kind of know what the field name is, but you don't remember, you can go ahead and drill into that. So that's kind of the basics of this. And we'll look at SQL Server in a second to give you, oh, I forgot to show the properties. So here's all the properties that you can set on this. So some of the ones I like to use is like what you're showing. And for example, if I had some really big tables, I can say apply to this, and it gets rid of all the fields that aren't primary keys or foreign keys. So that's good if you've got, some really long tables, you can show that. I'm going to toggle that back, apply. The attributes, it's just showing the icon, but you could actually show the data types. So if I, oh, this doesn't work in Access, sorry. But if I was in SQL, it'd show the data types. And then you've got a couple different routing options and a couple different notation styles. This IDEF1X is the default, but I'm used to crow's feet, which gives you kind of an easy visualization of what's the one side, what's the many side. So with that, I will close this and we'll save this. So let's go ahead and connect to, let me get my notes real quick. I'm going to go ahead and connect to a SQL Server, and that'll work very similarly. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new connection. And this time I'll select the SQL Server driver, and I will paste that in there. And this is just SQL authentication. So there's nothing special. Whoops. SQL Express. Sorry, Windows authentication is what I want. There we go. So it's connected. I'll go ahead and hit finish, and you can see it dropped down in here. Now it's defaulting to the master database. So I can go in here if I want to call it something a little more meaningful than every database I connect to being master. I can actually rename this. So I could call this, let's call it local SQL Express. So I can rename that. I can then drill in. There's multiple databases in here. This is the worldwide importer one we looked at. I can set that as a default, which will basically mean any editor we open up, it'll pick that database as the default. And if I drill in here, you can see it lays things out a little bit differently than SQL. It actually puts schemas in their own folders, which is kind of nice. So if I were to go into, say, let's look at the purchasing schema, I can go in here and I can see the tables. And then if I were to look at maybe the sales schema, I can see the tables in there. So again, depending on the database, it's going to lay things out a little differently in DBeaver, but it's very similar. You can see, I've got the indexes, but I have a lot more items like triggers, which Access has no real concept of triggers. At least it didn't until data macros, which is loosely based on that. So let's go ahead and create another diagram. And let me go down here to, where's diagrams? Create a new ERD diagram, and you can see, let's call it here. What's this one? This is the, it's called SQL. If I drill in here, databases, I have to go pick the database. And then I've got to go into the schema and pick the database tables. Just for comparison, with SQL, it took like 40 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and select all these, with the exception of DBO, because that just has the system tables for that. So I'm going to go ahead and create that, hit finish. And this connection to that same database takes about 5 seconds. So it's much quicker. It still kind of does an iffy job of laying things out. But it's a lot less white space. And honestly, with a table like this that has every single relationship, or is basically pointing to every single table, it's hard to get a very clean ERD diagram. And again, I get the same kind of thing where I can click on this and it'll show me a self-referencing table. And here, I must have turned those on. Let's see, notation. Nope. What is it? It's data types. So I take that off, I get a little cleaner diagram. So same basic principle to go ahead and connect to that. But what's cool is you can create multiple diagrams. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one. And because I've got different schemas, I can go in and basically create a diagram for a schema. So I'm going to go in, actually, I'm going to go in here and say diagrams again. And this time I'm going to call it suppliers. We'll drill down here, databases, schema, and that's in the purchasing. And actually, let's not do it this way. Let's create a diagram. Let's create a new diagram. We'll call it SQL. And I'm just going to hit finish. And then let's just drag the items down. So I can drag down a customer table if I want. I can drag down maybe the supplier table. I can drag, how about supplier transactions? That should show a relationship. I can drag in the categories, maybe the purchase orders and purchase order line items. So you can see I can kind of build this up from scratch. And what you may notice here is the customer is yellow. Everything else is kind of a light brown. That's because these are on different schemas. And if I were to click on a table, maybe hard to see, but down the bottom, it says what schema that belongs to. And if I click on customers, it'll say it's sales and customers. So we don't really need customers for this, but I can go into, say, the applications, and I can drag in cities, which is going to join to that. And maybe I want to drag in the people table. You can see, again, it puts a lot of relationships there you don't necessarily need to have, but they're there. And in this case, I can actually just, delete it and go. So that's kind of cool. The other thing that you can do is, let me go back to Access tables, and let's say we're going to bring in the companies table, and let's bring in the other companies table, which was, that's customers. Let's say it's the customers table. So I've got one from Access and I've got one from SQL. I can actually define a virtual, actually, sorry, that's customer transactions. I want customers. I can actually define a virtual relationship here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And that will now persist throughout the database. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't enforce anything other than show there's a relationship. And so I can move this around a bit. You also have the ability to do a bit of annotation. If I can remember where this is, let's see, tools palette, note. I can actually drag a note over here, and I have to send it to the back. Send to back, and I could say access DB. And then I could float this around. So you can kind of do a little bit of customization if you've got something you want to call out, tables that are going to be new to a database or something like that. You can kind of highlight them that way. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's see what, yeah. So you talked about like being able to go in and, create multiple diagrams. Well, that's great. But the people at DBeaver kind of thought, well, we could probably do that for you. So if I were to open up, say, the customer table, there's actually, along with properties and data, it builds an ER diagram for me. And this will basically take any first degree relationship and show it. So I don't get the complete diagram, but I only get the tables that are related to customer, and customer shows up as orange. I can move things around if I want to say, this is really kind of hard to read, but I can maybe make it better, or in this case, maybe I'm making it worse. I can move things around, and then I can hit this keep layout. And what that does is saves it. So if I were to go back into the customer database, it's saved. So there's multiple layers that you can actually kind of grab information from, or get an ERD diagram. So you can do it at the table, which shows the related. I can also do it like probably here under sales. And I believe this will generate one that's just the sales schema for me. And I don't know if I can do it at the parent level up here at schemas. I don't think I can. No, so I can do it on a schema level or a table-based level, or you can create a custom one. So that's kind of slick. I find that's great if I'm like, okay, I need to do something to a table, and oh my God, what are the relationships? Well, I can just double click on that table. And in this case, I better be very careful what I'm doing to the people table, because everything is dependent on that in some way, shape, or form. So with that, any questions so far? because that's really the brunt of what I wanted to show is the ERD stuff that you basically will build things for you for very little effort.
Looks excellent, Kevin. I've downloaded and installed it and got it working already. You can generate SQL and DDL, which is going to be excellent for me.
Yeah.
Access database. That's brilliant.
Yeah. That's the piece I'll show you. I just want to see if any questions specific about ERD diagrams or anything I showed not make sense.
What's the licensing deal? Is there a free copy? Is that the community copy? Is it or?
Yeah. Community is free. The pro version has some kind of licensing model. I forget what it is. If you're doing this stuff 40 hours a week, it might make sense to get the pro for, but everything I've been able to do, I've been happy with just the community version.
Is the generate SQL and the DDL in the community version? Or?
Let me show you. So like let's not get people. Let's look at the supplier table. So again, you get the ERD diagram. It also lets you look at data. And if you want to look at it in the kind of an old school dot matrix, you can that, but it also gives you a grid. So that's pretty slick. And it lets you look at the properties of a table. And so I was working on a project that was just, way too many fields, very similarly named. If you're looking for a field, it's nice to be able to click on here and sort the fields alphabetically. So you can kind of see what's there. And then of course you can sort, basically on any of the fields. It gives you kind of an overview of like, does it allow nulls? Is it not? What's the precision on the database? You can see the keys in here. This one doesn't have any constraints, but you can see the foreign keys. You can see the indexes, whatever's referencing it. There's not any triggers in this database. Extended properties, I'm not sure what that is. You can look at statistics. It'll tell you how big the table is. And then here's your data definition. So if you wanted to just scrape, I need to create a similar version of this table, you can just grab it here. And then this virtual one, let me show you, what was it, the customer table, I think we added a virtual key. So you see down here, there's a virtual foreign key that points back to the access. So if I needed to delete that, I could go in here and remove it, or I could just define something here. So it's pretty slick. Let's see. What's the one I think it was supplier again? Yeah, so the supplier, when you look at the data, there's some other cool things you can do. There's a value field that I can open up. And as I click on a field, you can see it's value 2, which is not real interesting. Or, the consolidated messenger, which if the text was really long, like a note field or something, it's kind of nice to see the whole thing without having to scroll around. But what's really cool is if I select, say, the supplier category, it tells me it's 6, but it also says, oh, because I know this is a relationship, I can actually show you what 6 means. So I can see that right away. And if I do it for the contact, it'll show the, who that contact is, who's the alternate contact, delivery method. Here, there's a bunch of cities. So if I click on this one, it's Zionsville. Like, you're probably never going to remember what those city codes are, where, you might learn when you've got whatever, 9 categories, that might be easy to remember. You can also filter on this. So if I remember how to do this, if I go up to here and say filter by value, I can actually select or unselect whatever values I want. So maybe I want to look at the novelty goods and the toys, and I don't care about anything else. I can say apply filter, and it basically creates a filter for me right here. So again, pretty cool. You can navigate things. You can actually change data here. So I can go in here and say Kevin was here, and I can save that. Now, that hasn't persisted to the database yet. So I can make all the changes that I want, and then I have to go down here and hit save. Or if I do this right, I can say generate script, and this is the script that it's going to run. So you can see it's going to do an update, and it says this is what we're going to change the value to, and this is what the supplier ID is. So, maybe if you've got somebody that's kind of new to writing SQL, they could actually literally just do it manually and generate the scripts. Obviously, that only works for a small number of values. If I hit persist, that'll actually execute the script. Or I can go down here and hit cancel, and that throws away the change. Likewise, I can go ahead and, like if I wanted to insert a new row in here, it'll give me a row to insert. Let's see, what else is there? If we look at some of these, like a bigger table here, it tells you how many rows. It only caches the first 200 rows, so you don't end up like pulling more than you want down. But if you click here, it'll actually do a count for the record. So you can say I have 2,000 records. And then as I start scrolling, I can page, it'll jump me. Oops. I thought it would jump. Oh, it is jumping me. It's still on 200 though. Whoops. What happened there? That's weird. Somehow flip the data around. I've never gotten to this view before. Well, I'm not sure how to get out of this view now. That's kind of embarrassing. So somehow there's a new view or something that I've never seen before, which is showing me just the one record. That's interesting. I wonder if it does it to suppliers. Nope, suppliers is still that way. So, well, oh, it's record view. That's how you can toggle back and forth. I guess I've never clicked on that, or it's new. So that lets you look at one record at a time, which I guess is kind of cool. If you're in there and I select, say, record 8, I can toggle on to record 8. So, what else? Let me flip back. Oh, so we were talking about the like the query builder. It does a pretty good job. You can create a script, and by default, that'll get saved. If you use the console, that's kind of throwaway work. It won't get saved. But I can go ahead and create a new script here. And if I start typing select, it says, hey, we think you want select. I can just hit tab, and then I can say I'll select everything, and then from, and then how about we do from the purchasing dot suppliers, and it A-list it with an S. And so I could go ahead and I could run this. I could also go up here and say, well, I just want to have S dot, how about supplier name, and S dot, or the ID in the name. I can go ahead and actually I can just put it anywhere in the statement and execute it. I don't have to select it. And you can see it selects the values. One of my favorite things to do is to, so I'm going to do S dot asterisk. And then if I press the shift spacebar, it expands out all the fields. So it'll pull everything out, which is kind of hard to read. But I can go click here and I can say format SQL, which uses the default formatter. And now that puts it into a little more readable. So I could, what I find to do is I'll go into here and I can say, great, these are the fields I need to insert into a table, or these are the specific fields I want. So I can just go in and say, well, I don't care about any of down to there. And then I can run that directly. So again, it's not Redgate, but it actually works pretty well. So, and I think, let me flip back to my notes real quick. So the bonus, we took the autocomplete, the value of the panels, filters, and then the tables, we looked at the ERD diagrams and data and stuff like that. So yeah, that's basically kind of the intro to DBeaver, and hopefully looked at some of the ERD diagrams, and I'm looking at the chat now. Great, that's cool. Okay, so you guys weren't totally asleep. So, anyways, any other questions? Anything burning on the top of your mind? 'Cause that's really what I wanted to. Let's see. Can it compare schema? Yes. It is fairly limited. I don't remember what it'll do, but there's a compare migrate, and I think you can. Oh yeah, so I would have to actually select multiple. So let's try it on the supplier categories in the archive table. And I can do the compare and hit next. And let's open in a browser. This may get a little squirrely. Nope, there it is. So I got to drag this over. So there you go. So it ran through, and there's different options for what you can like decide is a difference or not. But you can see it's obviously the table name's different. The crate date on the table is a little different. The columns, this has got a default, so it's kind of showing things in blue that don't match, or in red if there's not an index. I believe the Pro version has a much more robust schema comparison, but that's just, like I said, I've never actually used it. I've just seen a couple of videos that were kind of touting the different features.
From here, can you generate a script to modify one of those two tables you're comparing if you wanted to bring them in sync? Or is that...
Not from there, because that's just a browser.
Yeah.
There might be an option.
The fact that it says migrate suggests that changes could be applied from one to the other.
It's possible. I don't see any compared skip system objects. That may be something that the Pro version allows you to do.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah.
The reason I asked about it is because that feature in SQL Server Management Studio is often broken for yeah, I had it working years ago, and then I updated Management Studio and couldn't get it working again. So I've got another software I use for that. But the fact that you can compare schemas is already very nice. Can it compare schema between a development version and a production version?
I believe so. Like, I think you can select objects from different databases, but you can only do it one at a time. So that's the rub, whereas the Pro version, I would guess you could say, well, compare database to database, not just single object at a time. I've used
it's pretty good for...
Yeah, there's actually drawing a blank here. Visual Studio actually has a project for SQL Server where you can actually, if you keep your schema in source code control, you can actually point to like a DAC pack. It's like a backup of just the structure of your database. You can point to that, or you can point to a database, and it'll actually compare the schema and generate the scripts to bring the database and source code control to whatever your target database is. And it works pretty well. You've got to be careful about, at least I've seen it a couple times, where it's flipped the order of things around. Like, it got that I need to modify these objects, but it did it in the wrong order. So,
Right.
And that may have been just like a quirk or something like that. But we use that on a lot of projects that are using SQL Server. So one, it gives you source code control, because a lot of our clients, like, I don't have access to, I have access to the production SQL Server, but I can only query it. I can't do any data edits, any object changes, it all has to get checked in and deployed through a pipeline.
Yes. And Jeffrey, you mentioned, Visual Studio. That's what I meant to say, not Management Studio, Visual Studio.
Yeah.
But for me, that broke a long time ago.
I've been having really good luck with it. I've actually used it a lot recently. And one of the other nice things about the SQL Studio schema compare is you can also do a data compare from within those tools and synchronize actually the data between two tables too, which is really useful lately for me anyway. So I've had really good luck in Visual Studio, especially 2022. If you look at the tools of SQL Compare, the compare data are really good.
Thanks for that. Yep.
Okay.
I think I got Brett's about the DLL. Oh, and DLX, yeah.
So I see an option there for data load simulation. What does that do?
That's in
Down
here?
right there. Yeah.
That's actually a schema that's empty.
Oh, it's an empty schema. Okay.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, sorry. That's one of the things, because it breaks it down, it can kind of get cluttered up.
Ah,
But yeah, so the first
it's a
level
schema.
is the schema, and it's actually empty, as well as like the website doesn't have any tables, it only has views. So, but yeah, I suggest, try it, kick the tires. There's a ton of stuff. You could talk for hours on this if you knew all the nooks and crannies of it.
Well,
Well,
this is certainly a lot better than the Management Studio diagrams.
Yep.
yeah.
And what I have been doing just for little snippets here and there is just using an access query and design view to create little ERDs of just part of this whole
Yep.
schema.
Yep.
But Shane Groth's been talking about wanting to add to the development list to deal with that problem with two tables, two instances of the table to point at whatever. And he's also, because in Access, you've got in the MSys objects, you've got one record to record your relationships diagram.
Yep.
But there really doesn't seem to be any reason why it wouldn't be hard to create multiple records that allow you to save multiple diagrams in an Access database, but it's still not going to be as good as this.
Probably not for a lot of years. And yeah, so the storage is there, but they'd have to build a new UI for it. They'd have to figure out, like, how do you select the diagram? How do you save the diagram? How do you delete a diagram? Can you delete all the diagrams, or do you have to have one diagram? So it's definitely possible, but I think it's probably a lot of work on their end.
Stephen
again,
Leibniz did a little thing to allow you to save multiple diagram layouts, and it's kind of all right, but often it will put tables way off to the left or way up at the top, so it's a bit doesn't work all that well.
Well, I just want to jump in here because Laban's tool, you can also, because it does save everything in a table, if it moves things, you can do an update query on the table. You can move them back to not negative numbers.
Yeah, but the other problem with it is that it won't add tables. I'm just trying to remember where I was using it last. It won't add tables. It just remembers what tables you actually had in the diagram. I can't remember, but it didn't really quite work as...
Right, it doesn't add anything new.
Oh, can you create tables using this tool?
Sure. I mean, you could, well, if I was to go to, let's look at I think this is a pretty small table. So I could grab this, copy it in. I could modify, whatever I wanted to modify, and we could generate a new table on the fly. Yeah, pretty much anything you can run in the console or a SQL script. I don't think there's no,
Oh, yeah.
I don't think there's an entry point to like say create it. Again, I haven't, other than the relationships and some of the,
Well,
kind of
right
SQL
there
stuff.
at the top of that menu, it says create.
Oh, create a table. Yeah. Okay, there you go. So I wonder if I could, so in theory, I could go down here probably, and I don't know how I add a create new column. There you go. So I can create column 1. I can create column 2 as an int. Let's make it an identity. Let's make it unique. And there you go.
Nice.
So then I can actually and then save, will actually preview and save the change.
Nice.
Yeah. I think views are probably the same way, but you don't get the access the query by example grid. I believe the pro version has something that lets you do that. So this, I guess you could drag columns, but I'm not sure how you define. You have to say what table it is, and I'm not sure. Like I said, I've just written the raw SQL.
Nice. Very valuable tool. Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you very much, Kevin. That was really great. I'll go ahead and stop the recording unless there's other conversation or follow-ups.